Thank you for staying with us. As you've seen right there, Mr. Taiwo Oyelele joins us this morning. He is Chairman, Presidential Committee, Tax and Fiscal Policy Reforms. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Aya.
Well, that report opened with the President's statement, now famous statement, let the poor breathe. When will the poor start breathing?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I think that statement, sometimes people don't appreciate how important it is. Unfortunately, sometimes also people say it like it's a joke or just a cliche. But the reality is that things are tough. Even before the first subsidy removal and the harmonization of exchange rate windows, because we have to think about both of them. In fact, sometimes you would agree that the impact of the exchange rate harmonization could even be bigger than the impact of first subsidy removal. Combined, what that has meant is the 133 million people living in multidimensional poverty are not finding it easy. Think about it this way. When things are hard for the middle class and the elites, they cut down on savings and investment. They still meet their basic needs. For the poorest people, what they have to cut down is from 3 meals, if they're lucky, it's 2. Some were doing 2, it's down to 1. Some were doing 1, they reduce the portion. Some have reduced the portion before, there's nothing else to do. Some will withdraw their kids from school. Some will not be able to get medical treatment. I'm even talking about paracetamol to fight malaria. We removed subsidy from fuel, and it meant you would have noticed that traffic is light. But if you think deeply, what it actually means is that the people who are unable to put their cars on the road the way they used to do were the lower income people, right? If you also think about it, those are the people who would regularly patronize the vulcanizers, the mechanics. So if you speak to the vulcanizers now, life is difficult. For them, the apprentices that work with them and the families that they support. So the long and short of it is, there has to be that sense of urgency to do something quickly. Communicating that urgency is also another issue. I do agree with you, because it doesn't matter how well intended your actions are. If you don't communicate, in fact, it can have the opposite effect. Which it seems to have been having. But let's go to some of the myths of the matter. One of the first questions that comes to mind for me, especially in terms of our fiscal environment, is one of the questions that we asked you, previously, which is that of leaks. Financial leaks in government. I always reference, my colleagues have labeled me, concerning the Auditor General's report. Successive Auditor General's report from as far back as I can remember continue to point at situations that are very damning. Where we have, in fact, I think I remember a SERAP analysis saying that we had a deficit in the region of 2-something trillion unaccounted for, maybe not stolen, but unaccounted for in the budget of 2017. Now that is definitely concerning, and when you read it, read the report, it says, look, so person is supposed to give accounts, but unfortunately, that report is not even getting the attention of the National Assembly until like 2-3 years down the line. So, is there any way, what have you discovered in terms of such leakages in government? Yeah, very interesting. The mandate of the Presidential Committee that I have the opportunity to share is quite broad, and it covers issues around the spending. So we say, 1, the quality of spending, the priority of what you are spending the money on, and the efficiency. I would say, for example, if it took us over 10 years and we haven't completed Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, that's not good enough. If you are building flyovers when you don't have clean potable water, you don't have primary schools with covered roof, it's wrong priority. And even when the priority is right, is that the amount you should be spending?
So every time I look at the Auditor's General report, it breaks my heart. And some of the studies we have done, even before my current role around the taxpayers' perception, shows that they do not trust government. Nigerians do not trust government, and it's one of the reasons why they don't want to pay taxes. So first and foremost, I even think that those reports should be up to date. We should not be talking about 2017 in 2023. We do not lack accountants. We do not lack the technology. So if we decide today that government accounts, including, just imagine seeing the federal government's balance sheets and the balance sheet for your states, and it's on time, right? I'll say within 3 months after the end of the period, we should have the financial statement of government. In fact, one suggestion that is coming from my committee is, someone said, the Constitution says the president and the governor should present the budget for the next fiscal year. Why can't we amend the Constitution to say, as you are presenting the budget for the next year, give us the account for the one you just did, so it becomes constitutional? And when you break down those reports from the Auditor General, you would also see that some of the people who are not complying with paying taxes are the organs and agencies that should be driving tax collection themselves and compliance. So it's tough, and the solution to the problem is never to then say, since we don't like the way they're spending the money, some of them are not compliant, all of us should just not comply. Then we no longer have a society. So which means the one option we have is to get government to do the right thing by holding them to account, by asking for more transparency, and then by speaking up. And also playing our own part, whatever that may be in terms of paying our taxes. I do admit that the number of taxes are too many. The burden is too much, particularly on the lower cadre of society, and that's part of the mandate that Mr. President has given to my committee to reduce that burden. And back to your first comment around, to let the poor breathe. Yeah.
But, you know, you still haven't really told me exactly what your findings have been and how do we block these leakages, because the MDAs are not just going to fold their hands and say, okay, you know, let's just be. So what have you found out? You've told us that it's been acceptable for you, even unacceptable for you, even before you got into government. But now that you're in this role, what have you found out, and what do you think we have to do?
Yeah, interesting. So we haven't found out a lot. If the mandate of my committee is for 1 year, divided into 3 milestones. So the first one is quick wins within 30 days. And those quick wins were meant to address the socio-economic issues we are dealing with, fuel subsidy removal, exchange rate, and some of the things are like impediment to people just wanting to live honestly, making decent living, including Nigerians who want to be in Nigeria and work for global organizations. So that is what we have prioritized, and that in itself was a lot of work. But I have to say I've been blessed with, you know, almost anything you can ask for in terms of human resources and the support from the system. So our draft report was only just concluded a couple of days ago. Mr. President is out of the country. Our 30 days was 7th of September. So it's in our phase 2 where we're going to be doing a lot of, you know, findings. So I don't want to, you know, say something that I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Okay. I'm assuming that you want the president to see the report before you let the cat out of the bag.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. But, you know, so what are the things? In that report, you also mentioned conversations with the subnationals. What are some of the discoveries that you have made? Because what affects the federal government also affects the state governments as well.
Yeah, very good question. So, in fact, you know, without apportioning blames, when it comes to the poorest people in society, the most impact on their lives, whether it's positive or negative, tends to come from the local government first, and then the states before the federal government. Yeah. Some of the things we found out, if you just look at the list of taxes and levies, you see all manners of, like wheelbarrow tax. Who does that, right? Life is hard already. That someone has to do that hard labor just to make ends meet. Maybe you end up with 2,000 a day, right?
And that kind of, my apologies, that kind of tax or levy is coming from the local government?
Yes. It's coming from the local government. Again, I'm not blaming them because someone put it in the constitution and then they created a list and they said this is what you could collect. So altogether today we have over 60 of those different taxes and levies. We think we should have less than 10 single digits. And we think that by having less than 10, that the magic is that the people will actually pay less and government will collect more, because where you get the efficiency from is the collection that sometimes does not go to government today. People are harassed. In fact, someone told us, it was Matan, the market trader association, people said, just selling pure water in the market, they call it ticket. They say you need 7 tickets every single day. Just imagine that. Ticket for what? So,
local government tickets.
Yeah, local government.
That is definitely not in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's not in the Constitution, that I can tell you. But you know, they can always find a way to say, well, the Constitution says we could levy taxes on market. So you create different names for them, right? So
for those selling pure water.
Yes, just pure water. So you can imagine if you graduate it to someone who is selling something, you know, much more, expensive than water. Now, and, you know, there was even one I read in one of the things we were doing while I was at PwC for, you know, media excellent reporting. And then we read this story about a woman in Yaba, you know, a tailor. And then she would go there, carry the head of the machine and the base. And then there was no money to even get transport. So she trekked to the market. She trekked and then put down the stuff. She hasn't made 1 naira, and then they showed up and they said 400 naira. And she was begging and pleading. So they removed the head of the machine and walked away. And she started crying. So I said, but we can't be doing this to ourselves, right? So these are people in society that we should, on a normal day, be writing them a check every month, you know, so they can keep body and soul together. It's bad enough we're unable to do that. It's even more painful that we then extract from them. And more often than not, those extractions don't get to government, so those people will never get any benefit from those payments. So essentially, to your question about subnational is, we think that we'll never be able to solve these problems by focusing only on the federal governments. We need to pay equal attention to the subnational, local government, states. In our courtesy visit, that's my committee to the vice president, I think it's exactly 2 weeks ago now. That was the reason for that, to be able to have the engagement with the NEC, National Economic Council, where we have the governors. And then we'll go beyond that and also interact with the local government. We'll pay some of them a visit so we can understand their perspective. This is not about blaming anyone. This is to say that we have to work together in solving these problems for our country.
Well, that's really interesting. But then, another angle in this whole conversation is, because I was going to ask you how you intend to interface with the state governments, but good that that's going on. The private sector is also very, very critical in all of this conversation. What are the discoveries that you have made with them? There are a good number of them who say, I mean, we've read countless reports, and I'm pretty sure you're aware, that at the ports alone, I think this report was on the front page of one of the dailies about 2 years ago, that at the ports, $100 million is 100 million naira is collected daily. I was shocked. Is it daily or monthly? I was shocked to find that such a thing happens, and then we still don't have the kind of smooth operations at the ports that we are supposed to have. So that, for instance, is one of the areas in which the private sector operates. What are your findings, and what do we need to do? Which agencies of government are culpable in this?
Yeah, you know, I've spent over 20 years of my career dealing with these issues, relating with both the public sector and the private sector, from the global multinational to the micro and nano businesses. I've been to, you know, Balogun, Onisha market, you know. I've been to those places where you relate with the real people who are trying to just survive. So what we have found out is a lot of these problems have been created because there hasn't been that deliberate attempt to do a review like what we now have, to say from end to end, where do we have those problems and bottlenecks. So, and that speaks to one of the pillars of the presidential committee that I'm sharing. which is really about economic growth facilitation. When you then break it down, we have an aspect of competitiveness and then economic growth. So where we're looking at what are the impediments to trade for everyone. So if you take the ports, there are 1,001 war stories that people can tell you, from the question about importing from China to the ports being a lot cheaper than getting it from the port to somewhere in Ogun State. Not only is it more expensive financially, it takes much longer. And if you have that situation where you then have demurrage, you have a lot of other costs that you can't even account for, then we are then surprised that there is inflation and people can't afford, basic things. So these issues have to be addressed. One way we are looking at it is, we think that many of these agencies would rather not be bothered with this function of trying to collect levies here and there, and they rather focus on their core mandates, which then will mean that they're able to perform their roles better. And then we can use technology or whatever it is to harmonize those collections so it's easier to pay, maybe USSD or whatever it is, multi-channel mode of payment. With receipts, you can get electronically on your device, for example. It doesn't have to be a smartphone, by the way. And then that level of efficiency in collection and transparency will give you more revenue that you can use to take care of society. It will take off the burden from the agency so they can focus on their primary mandate. That in itself facilitates economic growth. And altogether, we think this is a fantastic win-win situation for everyone. And this is, we're not seeing anything that it's out of this world or even novel for that matter. It's done everywhere, including countries in Africa and countries outside of Africa. So we, one agency that I would not mention, so private sector people, some of the few meetings I've had, where they had an analysis that shows that this agency was collecting dollars from them, and it was the highest in the world, and they are also planning to increase it. So we're even saying to ourselves, why do we have to pay an agency of government in Nigeria in dollars? We don't have dollars. That not only increases the cost of doing business, it creates an extra demand in the foreign exchange market that makes naira to further depreciate. And once it depreciates, we can know, what that means. It just, it filters through the economy by way of higher prices for goods and services, and more people get into poverty. I think a lot of the problems we're dealing with are not rocket science. I think we can deal with the right leadership, and then with people who want to do the right thing, one step at a time. I think we'll get there.
Just a quick one on that revelation that you just gave us. Is there any agency of government that pays duties or royalties or makes returns to the federal government in foreign exchange that is legally empowered to do that, other than the NNPC?
Yeah, so the answer, unfortunately, is yes. So we have some laws in Nigeria that permit some agencies to collect levies and taxes in dollars. I would say for certain, the FRS. So for example, it's not like there's anything wrong with the FRS collecting taxes in dollars, because they will remit to government also in dollars. But the way it works is, I think there was a wrong thinking about what it meant. So if people are watching you online, or you want to do an online program and you subscribe without promoting anyone, and some of these organizations are not Nigerian companies. Let's say you have to pay $1,000 for the software. So in Nigeria, there's value-added tax 7.5%. There's withholding tax sometimes about 10%. So after paying $1,000, because you need to go to the forex market to bid for the $1,000 to pay. When you're done, the taxman says, well, based on our laws, since this transaction happened in dollars, you also pay me my taxes in dollars. So you go back to the foreign exchange market to go and bid for maybe another $200 to pay government. Now, when you do that, what you're doing is you're increasing the demand in the foreign exchange market, and when you get the dollar, it's moving it from right hand to the left hand. It has not increased the dollar supply in Nigeria, but it has created an extra dollar demand. So, which is why the work of my committee, phase 2 that we're getting into now, are critical reforms where we're going to be looking at those laws and say, we wrote these laws for ourselves, nobody gave them to us. So let's just go back and amend them. Maybe they were relevant and useful, 20, 30 years ago, but today, clearly, they're creating more problems than solutions for us.
Now, how significant has that been on the economy?
I'll say it's been significant. We don't have specific data to measure it, but while I was at PwC, I could tell you easily anytime that I had clients who had taxes to pay. The law says they should pay them in dollars. They couldn't find dollars. Yeah, and they were large amounts. So a couple of times the FRS has come up to say, you know what, we allow you pay in naira. To be honest, they didn't have any legal basis to do that, but they were just so looking at why are we making life difficult? So government can't get the revenue on time, the people can't get the dollars to pay. It's just, chaotic sometimes, if you want to describe it. And this is just one example. So you have other examples in different scenarios like that. We have to create demand for our naira, not against it. So which is what I think we're doing inadvertently in some cases. I hope we even get to a point that even the petroleum companies that are producing crude oil will be asked to pay their taxes in naira. Let them carry their dollars and go and sell it in the forex market to buy naira to go and pay government. So that way you create liquidity that is sustainable, and then you can have a stable currency that then attracts a lot of investment in your direction. And without those investments, there can be no economic growth.
I know my colleagues in Abuja would also want to weigh in, but let me ask you this. You stated it the other time. You hinted at nano, micro, and small businesses. How tough is it with them? I know you've mentioned the pure water seller and a number of others like that, but those are largely unregulated, one might say. Even for the regulated MSMEs and the rest of them, what are the upsides that they should look forward to? Because if things are so tough for them, they are going to stop employing, or even from what information we even have available, even FMCGs are beginning to lose businesses and consequently, relieve some workers of their jobs. Job losses are increasing, unemployment figures are getting worse. So what are the upsides for the micro, small, and medium enterprises in a way that will help them remain in business? If you want to cite any example of any particular sector, please do.
Yeah, so we don't have accurate numbers, but different sources will give you around 40 million nano MSMEs. I think sometimes we forget the nano because that's the only reason why it got to 40 million. Some of these people don't even consider themselves as doing business. They just think they're hustling to survive, which is really what they're doing. And the data also further suggests that about 97, 98% of that 40 million are actually these people who are struggling. Most times they're the only employee, they're everything. They're the MD, they're the messenger, so they just do everything themselves, maybe with family members. Those are the people for us where we need urgent intervention because they're struggling. Survival is difficult on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, what they should expect is that the burden that they're having to carry now would reduce significantly. One of the reasons why this is a priority for us is that if you come to a large company and you tell them you're owing 10 million naira tax bill, chances are that they have an accountant who can defend them, a lawyer, or they can even hire a consulting firm to defend them. So at the end of the day, maybe they don't have any tax liability. When you go to that woman or that man who is struggling to survive, he doesn't want that, he has not even seen a copy of the tax law before, he has no idea how to defend him or herself, then you say, madam, you're owing us 1 million naira. So the person will start begging. And then they say, oh, God, pay 200,000 to this account, then pay 100 to government, and then you now say thank you on top of it. Maybe you shouldn't have paid at all. So we think that is not being fair to our most vulnerable people. Part of what my committee is planning to do is that when we are done, we should have a tax ombudsman that is funded by the government that can defend this kind of people.
Federal or state?
It will be national. So we're looking for a structure that cuts across. First and foremost, legally take away their burden. So I was just looking at it just a few days ago. Brazil just increased the exemption for personal income tax to about 400,000 naira per month. You don't pay tax on it. UK, it's about 13,000 pounds. That's almost 1 million. I know that it's not the same because cost of living is high, but they have been intentional in trying to establish what is it that people need to survive and exempt it from tax. We need to do that in Nigeria. The threshold is too low. So if you officially exempt a lot of these people from tax, then nobody can even harass them if they don't have any taxes
So
to pay.
is that 25 million threshold
for VAT?
Yes, it's not enough.
I'll say we need data to determine what will be enough. I don't think it's enough. That's just barely 2 million a month. If you calculate 2 million a month, you divide by 30 days, you barely just, maybe selling pure water. By the time you take out your cost, there's nothing left. But clearly, the personal income tax one is only 30,000 naira per month. What can you do with 30,000? So if you earn 31,000 naira per month, you start paying personal income tax. We need to increase those thresholds so that the poor can breathe.
Chamberlain.
Yeah, Mr. Idile, so do we expect some executive order from the president concerning the first phase, which you say you concluded?
Yes. The expectation is that Mr. President will need to sign executive orders. In fact, we also think that even governors might need to sign, because some of the recommendations we have in our reports, which I'm not going to discuss as of yet, also require actions by sub-national. So what we're planning to do is we prepare the orders. If Mr. President is happy, he will then sign them so that those things can take effect immediately. For the things where you need to amend the law, it takes a bit more time. We may then have to consider an emergency intervention law and then find a way to take that through the National Assembly very quickly. And then for the states and local government, then the governors would then sign those executive orders. Some of them will come in form of directives and public notices. We're looking at all the instruments that are necessary to give effect to our recommendation as quickly as possible. Starting with we call them quick wins, where you don't need a long process. Of course, for example, if you need to amend the constitution, that's not going to happen in 1 month or two. But there's clearly a lot of low-hanging fruit and fruit on the ground that we can pick in the next few days and weeks.
So, we always talk about how to ensure that we adequately implement a lot of these policies and laws when they're signed. So is there any unique, specific focus or strategy to ensure that once that is done, it is implemented as soon as possible?
The answer is yes. One of the excitement for me personally in this my new role is that the president was very clear to say, I'm not just looking for reports, I'm looking for you guys to help me implement. So if we say, for example, you should exempt, people who earn more than 30,000, I'll not give you the number we have in mind, say that amount is 60 or 70,000 from tax. If the president says, I'm fine with it, and the governor says we're also fine, we then immediately write the instrument to give effect to that almost immediately. And in my estimation, those would be something from 1 day to, say, maybe 2 weeks to quickly go through that. If what you are proposing is to say, well, government, we think that private sector, when you increase minimum wage, they don't benefit. How about we allow the private sector to also benefit by way of tax break or even credit? Some of the things we had thought about is, if you want to do conditional cash transfer, people are poor, they need food, they need money. We think that if we had done a proper job, which we are planning to do now, you should be at a point where, from the records you have with the tax authority, you know who is even poor, and you can credit them directly. Either you credit their bank accounts if they have, if they don't, you can credit their phone, and it becomes like a food stamp, which they then present and they collect the food, and it's easy to audit. And that's why many countries, when we had at the height of COVID, they didn't have to be doing palliative that got stuck at warehouses. They credited people. So people have to take the reforms we're trying to do now. If I want to do an estimation, I'll say even 90% of it is nothing to do with collecting more revenue. 90% of it is just getting economic data that we can use to plan our lives, to help our poorest people, to make sure people who are not the poorest pay their fair share, and that when all of that is done, to ensure that government is using it for the purpose of the people as it should be. So that's the journey we have ahead of us, and we believe that this is doable.
So, do you limit yourself to what is referred to as tax. I mean, they call it taxes, but there are those who also say, but you have levies, be it license fees, and since it all comes from the pockets of businesses and operators, it's a type of tax. So does that fall under your purview to look at that as well?
Yeah, interesting question, Chamberlain. So actually what we have done is we've tried to define what is a tax. We think sometimes government and tax people, and I say tax people now, knowing that many people will be saying, you're not one of them. So they can become too technical. So they tell you what the tax law book says, one theory when they were writing ICANN or CITN exam. Nobody's interested in that. As a Nigerian who is trying to sell pure water, who is a vulcanizer, who is trying to just sell food, if you come to me and you collect anything for which I have no direct benefit, it doesn't matter what you call it. To me, it's a tax I've just paid. It doesn't even matter whether it's government that collected it from me. If government allowed a tout to harass me when they don't have no powers to tackle them, I'll take it as tax. So for us, we are looking at all of that. Formal taxes, informal taxes, whether it's paid to government, or whether it's paid to other people, but permitted by government, we consider it as tax, and we're going to try and reform all of that, so that at the end of the day, from the person who is paying it, from their point of view, they'll feel like if I have to pay something and I have no choice as to how to pay it, how much I pay. Even if you are collecting my waste, waste collection should be a fee, right? Because it's a service you are rendering. But if you confine me to a particular provider and you prescribe the rate such that it's above market rate, I'll take it that you are collecting taxes from me indirectly. What you should do is to regulate that sector, prescribe the standard that you need to meet to be able to collect my waste, and then say, dear Taiwo, in this your area, here are the 20 people that can collect, and let me go and negotiate. So we are broadening it, quite widely. And it's your point, our work is not just about tax, it's revenue, which means tax and non-tax. It's expenditure, including capital and recurrent, the quality of spending, the priority of spending, and also debt management in terms of how do we manage our debt profile, the terms that we engage in for those debts, and how the money is even being spent and reported. So overall, I don't want to, of course, promise too much, but these are things that once we are done, people will feel the impact in a very positive way.
So, you do have your job cut out for you. I mean, one of the things you talked about is how to create like an attraction for the naira where those who are seeking to do business are actually looking for the naira. And one would wonder, how would that begin to happen? How quickly can that happen? Seeing that we are in the space where we are, revenue generation's there, and we still have expenditure. Thankfully, part of your responsibility is looking at the quality of government spending. So how quickly can that begin to happen where we have people running for the naira against running for the dollar?
So we think it's going to be a journey, but there are those what we can do in a matter of, I'll say, weeks. The demands we have currently in the market is already in the foreign exchange market as we speak. People looking for dollars, maybe also pound sterling and euros to pay all manners of levies and charges in Nigeria. I think we can take off the table almost immediately. Once you have the, maybe an executive order is signed, maybe central bank has to do some regulation, maybe it's to do with any other agency, we'll find out who those agencies should be that must take the actions immediately. And once those actions have been taken, what will happen immediately is that those demand, whatever numbers they might be, are taken off the market. And then instead of those people looking for dollars to pay, they now start looking for naira. So in fact, the impact can almost be as double, because not only are they no longer looking for dollars, they're now looking for naira. And the thing about it is, at the end of the day, when you do that, there was a time that Russia was even selling their crude in their local currency. And despite all the sanctions from almost the whole world, their currency appreciated until recently when it started depreciating. So this is a time-tested principle. that you should not create demand against your own currency. And we also think that, government should also reduce their appetite for, foreign currency spending. So if, for example, an agency can do a training in Nigeria, if you have 20 people who want to be trained, and the person who can, let's say the only person who can train them is American in the US. So instead of 20 people traveling to America, maybe you bring one person to Nigeria to come and train you. And I was glad when Mr. President said the other time that if you don't have an item on the agenda for hunger, United Nations General Assembly, do not go. We think that should actually become structural and institutionalized, that the president doesn't have to say it. It should just happen naturally. So let's start demanding and creating interest in naira, such that even Nigerians will prefer to save in naira rather than looking for dollars to save because they're afraid that naira will lose its value before they know it. So all of these things, some of them will take a while, some of them will take years, some of them a matter of days, weeks, and months. We are starting with those ones where we can make quick progress, and then we move forward from there.
Yes, indeed, it will take time to see the fruits of these labor begin to show forth. And one will say, considering the fact also that those who are in leadership are amongst those who even spend the foreign currency more, that will be a lot of assignment and responsibility for you. But let's look at this other thing about the level of trust. It's been said that the Nigerian people themselves will not trust government enough, especially when it comes to taxes. So how would you break through that to see Nigerians begin to appreciate taxation and all that?
Yes, so Nigerians do not trust government. And when we did that study at the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, interestingly, it cut across, so the difference between the geopolitical zone was insignificant. And there was no difference materially between whether you were Christian or Muslim or whether you even believe in God. So essentially, these were just Nigerians saying, well, government hasn't done enough to earn our trust. And trust cannot be decreed. You cannot say, I hereby direct and decree that you must trust me. It has to be earned. So when we ask Nigerians why they don't trust government, of course, the first thing they gave was transparency and accountability. So every time you see on the pages of newspapers or on TV or radio that 2 billion is missing, 40 billion is missing. And it was also sad in the last administration that, 2 former governors that were convicted all the way to the Supreme Court were pardoned by the president. I felt pain personally because what we're saying is it doesn't matter. You can keep doing what you have been doing. So essentially, we have to earn that trust of the Nigerian people, first by communicating clearly, honestly, and sincerely. So for the work of my committee, for example, we set certain principles for our recommendations to Mr. President, and one of it is it has to be credible. You can't just say something so you have said it. We don't, for example, believe that buying buses will solve the problem, because how many buses can you buy? How many people can benefit from buying buses? So you have to be credible. Your information has to be clear. It has to be upfront, not the one that you're fighting misinformation. So you offer it upfront so people are clear. Okay. And number 2 is the transparency of reporting. And then accountability for when something has gone wrong, so we don't see impunity all over the place. And like Ayo said, if it's to do with financial statement, do it on time. If there have been violations, let there be consequences. I don't think that Nigerians are such a hard set of human beings. I believe that if you do this and you sustain it over a period of time, then the trust will come back.
Well, just a quick one before we sign up. Part of your job is to identify relevant measures to make Nigeria an attractive destination for investment. It leads me to the question of this currency swap that we had, this arrangement with China. How successful would you say that has been in terms of investments in Nigeria from such a country as China? And do you think it is something sustainable or that should be replicated in other countries?
Yeah, I'll say, it's a good idea, because whatever can save you even just $1, you don't need to look for $1 that you would have been looking for before, make some, dents. So you also have the Pan-African payment system that has been introduced, which is meant to connect with the African Continental Free Trade Area. But fundamentally, the reason why we haven't seen a lot of impact is if you agree with China to say, give me renminbi, so that when I buy from you, I'll pay naira. When you buy from me, you pay your currency. You have to then ask yourself, you have to reconcile at some point, because naira is useless in China. So until what we are selling to them matches what we are importing from them.
In terms of value?
In terms of value. Otherwise, that arrangement will collapse at some point, because you have plenty of naira that they can't do anything with.
So we have to be more productive.
Absolutely. That's what is most important. We have to be very, very productive. And we should stop looking at just only large firms that do manufacturing. They're equally important, by the way. But even services, creative sector, accounting, legal, we have technology, extremely smart people. So every $1 that you earn here and there, you start creating value, such that you can even extend this arrangement to India. You can look at your top 10 countries where you import from. So we want to match what we're importing from these guys, so we can use our currencies without a third currency, dollars, that is creating problems for our economy.
I'm certainly looking forward to that, whatever document from the federal government as a result of the work that you have done, because this would definitely be a good one and go a long way. Tawe Dele, Chairman, Presidential Committee, Tax and Fiscal Policy Reform, thank you so much for your time and all the best.
Thank you for having me.